goes. All right, let's start.
Dave. He is so Dave.
I hope you appreciate Julie as well. All right, let's get to work. So before
It's just a recording delay.
Should we write this on the back of this?
yeah, you're welcome to take notes on the back of this. I think that's probably a good idea.
I wrote that down.
Okay. I mean, I want this to go viral, right? So
what do you want us to take notes on?
I mean, everything. But in this case, before we get to recapping the specific things, let's make sure we have a clear sense and can articulate what those values of liberalism and conservatism mean in a mid-19th century moment as I aimlessly look around.
Oh yeah, because they used to mean like more enlightened ideas and liberalism was like you're more enlightened. They like take more of the enlightenment ideas into account or whatever, right?
Yeah, so some of those I think continue to be true. Do you want to start with any one of these ideologies and a core value of it?
Yeah, so so liberalism, it's more liberalism changes the status quo to expand individual rights and liberties.
Okay, so that continues to be true. There remains a focus on expansion of individual rights and liberties. What sort of things are we talking about? That the government...
Suffrage.
So, remind us, Adam, what is that?
The ability to vote.
Good. So voting rights are a big part. What others?
Can I ask a clarification?
Sure.
When they say male suffrage, that's the male right to vote.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's
and when they add
you can't vote, it's you can.
That's right. And when they add the universal in the front of it, what are they referring to?
Everybody, including all men, but not women.
That's right, not women, but all men. Why is it
of all colors?
Well, I mean, there aren't of all classes. That's the real part of universal. It's that there are no property qualifications to vote. Previously, right, there are property qualifications in place to give the sense, or to allow those who have a vested interest in society to vote. And right, that's sort of an older ethic that says those who don't own property aren't as invested in society. Give me some other examples. Cindy.
I think the more radical liberals were into eliminating the social hierarchy, right?
Okay, so part of liberalism in the expansion of rights would be to level the hierarchy.
Level hierarchy.
Yeah. And create more equality.
And this was in 1850s?
Yeah, we're talking mid-19th century. Was sort of the decades bracketing 1848 and so on. Okay, any other types of specific rights and liberties that liberals seek to expand?
Religious toleration.
Okay, religious toleration. So we have religious freedom. Anything else? Kate?
Free trade and economic liberalism.
All right, I'll throw that down as a new point because I think that would be these are sort of political rights, but then there's also encouragement for economic liberalism, which is right, free trade and economic modernization. Typically, how do we see this manifest itself in the 19th century?
There's less government controls on the market.
Okay. So there are declining regulations in order to encourage business to grow and investment in industry. Let the capitalists sort of do their own thing the best they can. All right. All right. Any other final rights to add here?
The right to strike and union.
Okay. So religious freedom.
Freedom of
Strikes.
So freedom of protest?
Unionization. Right. Sure. We'll just put that as protest. How about speech?
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Okay.
Thought.
Thought. Right. That's less, I mean, that's more overt, like people get concerned when the thoughts get outside of your mouth,
Yeah.
right?
That's a declining
Regulations?
Oh, I'm excited.
Sorry.
Oh, good man. Sir. Sir.
I haven't been knighted yet. There's hope still.
So more capitalist.
All right, so we got, this is the sort of, right, in terms of the categories, this is the sort of political side of liberalism. This is clearly the economic side, as if that weren't overt enough. In fact, I already wrote econ. Any other big characteristics of liberalism we should keep in mind? Grace?
Oh wait, hold on, I have a really good one. Did you? So, stop.
Julie, that's SAS, this is a SAS zone.
Yeah, this is all on tape, Julia.
No, stop.
All that sass, we're gonna quantify. I'm gonna put a sassometer in the lower corner.
So we started it.
It's like the
Oh,
noise meters
the,
at football
Yeah,
games.
exactly.
Like, government being slightly more representative?
Yeah, so I think another big thing in the expansion of liberties is that the expansion of suffrage would lead to representative government and legislatures, basically.
We do this because I never have enough.
Sorry. Sometimes you guys have free-flowing thoughts that circle back or modify earlier stuff, and it's not as beautiful and linear as one might hope. I'm sorry.
Legends.
And legislatures?
Oh.
There are plenty of seats here.
I
Rachel,
can
if you'd
see it, but the more messy my handwriting gets, the more everyone else's handwriting gets.
Okay.
It looks so weird to me.
Should we move over to conservatism?
Hold on.
Wait,
Wait, we did not
skip
right to protest.
Yeah.
Or strikes.
I missed that.
Yes, but it's there, so.
Oh.
Okay.
Rachel, you were the one who said this.
That would be cool.
That was just a fact.
I feel like the SAS can be measured by like a volume.
What
It's not a bad method.
So just get like a decibel measure
Right.
thing, and then
So,
like
But
get
sometimes
something off of Word and say like SAS meter.
Let's move on to conservatism. All right, Adam.
Well, it restores or goes back.
Folks, on to conservatism.
Oh,
It
right.
restores or goes back to the old status quo.
Okay, so preserve the status quo. So what is that going to look like in terms of political conservatism? Grace?
I don't, this isn't so much political, but I was thinking religious.
Okay, that's fine.
Like, it has like one central religion.
Okay, strong, central religious institutions. So like the Roman Catholic Church, for instance.
Yeah.
What other parts, Grace?
Government that doesn't have a parliament, or it's just kind of like a monarchy, maybe?
Yeah, we can characterize it more generally as an authoritarian government, so that the one individual ruler doesn't have to share power with anyone else and can just make decisions quickly and in dramatic ways. Julia?
Expansion to increase power of authoritarian.
Okay, so there might be expansionist
Or
or militaristic, trying to exude strength, political strength to avoid other powers from trying to threaten.
Would that go along with the idea of imperialism?
It will set us up to imperialism, right? We're not that,
In there yet?
we're not there quite yet in terms of a real intensive way. When we get into the late 1870s and then really the 1880s and 90s,
With the British Empire?
the British Empire, right, we know that in the 19th century, Britain has told the continent, we're not interested in messing around with anything going on here, right? The Congress of Vienna, they don't want any territory on the continent, they get a couple little islands.
Yeah.
They want to focus on their empire. So yes, they're globally developing colonies, particularly in India and in the Caribbean, but we will start to see other European powers looking beyond Europe a couple decades after the 1850s, okay? Other points for conservatism? Elizabeth?
Count the poor to vote.
Okay, so limited suffrage, because what happens if you expand suffrage to poor people?
Oh, then the social hierarchy starts to
Misinformed.
diminish
Which
because then
goes
the upper
with
levels
status
don't have
Well, you get
as much power.
You got it, right? So it's going to threaten that status quo of the social hierarchy and preserve powers. Julia?
Would you consider the act of plebisciting conservative?
How about holding a plebiscite?
Plebiscitation, not a word.
Plebiscitation. You went too fast and you had I don't know, you held too many elections of yes or no. They had to issue you a plebiscitation. No, that's not. I'm going to work on that. Daphne?
Funded by declining on the left side.
Oh, regulations.
Oh, okay.
Regulations. Okay. Well, Julia, plebiscites, where would plebiscites fall on this chart?
I don't know, in between.
In between, yeah.
No, But they are in and of themselves acts of suffrage, right?
Yeah.
Holding a big election.
They're not.
Yeah, but
The
they're
outcome
rigged.
is none.
It's like half and half. There's an inevitable outcome.
Okay, so the structure of voting
Favors conservatism.
favors conservatism, right?
Yes.
Those who hold the plebiscites. Okay, so we'll
So
get
it's
to
kind
that
of
in a moment.
display, you know, on the exterior of liberalism, but in actuality, it is more conservative in a sense.
Okay, so Cindy's posed something interesting. I like that characterization. There's sort of a outward display of liberalism. But what was the second part, Cindy?
But like in essence, it's conservative.
Okay, there's an essence of conservatism.
So basically, the original concept that is seen by the court is very liberal, but like the inner layers and mingling like that
Yeah.
are conservative.
Right.
For plebiscite, Shrek. Oh yeah, Mr. Marshler was telling us about the onion analogy for that.
What?
Cool.
And it's like that. The outside looks liberal, but then
Right. Another word we might talk about this is it has a facade of liberalism. Do you know that?
Facade, yeah.
Because this is an opportunity
that
for me to
fancy
write
C.
a CD on the board.
Don't know.
That weird C. It was like.
Anyway, exterior. What the appearance is.
And so it's like it's supposed to look liberal, but like then they want it to become conservative, so they have them.
Right. So, and we'll think about why that is, right? What the strategy is.
Because it's like you're saying like, oh look at me, I'm changing things, and like, oh, I like to change things, but you just don't.
Right. Exactly. Okay. There's one big final. Any other final points? I know there's one big thing up here I want to make sure we get before we move on, but you guys may have some other thoughts.
Economic conservatism.
Well, that's going to be probably authoritarian, right? Making decisions that are going to benefit the
Would
government.
high tariffs and taxes favor conservatism, or would that
They would strengthen the government
Yeah.
and hinder the free choice of industries.
What about like
So.
sorry.
Oh.
Like what about like on here it was gone back to like they're saying like he started like getting all these wars. It's like would that be
Well, we've talked about expansionist and being militaristic as a sign of a strong authoritarian government, so that might have some more conservative elements. I think the one final thing we should remind ourselves of that's important for conservatives, or at least generally, or maybe this is more true in the early 19th century, is that conservatism tends to, in the early 19th century, is anti-nationalistic, right? Metternich, who's our ideal, prototypical conservative thinker, wants to stop nationalism from happening. So maybe one of the things we see conservatism adapting to in Napoleon III is that the expansionist, militaristic, strong government aggression that happens in those wars is trying to make French nationality, in this case, predominant, right? To prove one nation's superiority over another. So in other words, the embrace of national rivalry.
But wouldn't that still fit under the idea of nationalism though? Because you're embracing national rivalry, so you're thinking that you're better than others, and isn't that a sense of nationalism at the same time?
It is, that's true. And this is where we start to see some overlap, right?
Yeah.
That this might be, as we talk about how do you get people to buy into and do something that on the surface looks to be liberal, this might be part of what we know is very appealing to liberals in the 19th century, which is a sense of nationalism, right, and the unique characteristics of each people.
Would that say French nationalism dominant?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, I want to highlight that some of the techniques of conservatism here, and hopefully this is something you get down, is a method to build support for what is a traditionally liberal concept. Am I closing the door? So Grace sought some clarification. Does anyone feel like that they can put in their own words what this big point is that I'm making here?
Wait, so with that, I think I missed it.
Mm-hmm.
So liberalism, there's more nationalism in
Traditionally,
nationalism is under liberalism, traditionally.
or the two have been more cohesive.
Yeah. But conservative is not as much for nationalism because they like to keep the old way.
Traditionally, that's been true, right? It was preserving the status quo. So if we think about Metternich, it was all about suppressing nationality and keeping, for instance, the Austrian Habsburgs dominant over that whole empire. But now we start to see Napoleon III trying to sort of play up French nationalism and use it as a means to get a whole bunch of people who might not actually be supportive of him to support him. Right?
Well, it's sneaky.
It is kind of sneaky. Or it might be, does this remind you of something?
Intelligent.
It's intelligent.
Napoleon.
Okay, yeah, Napoleon does this, right?
The
Yes.
way you define it here, wouldn't it seem that anti-nationalism would be the same thing as nationalism in a way? Because you're promoting national rivalry, which is sort of nationalism, because one nation is more
It's a
dominant over the another.
Yeah, if you're going to celebrate your nation, it inherently means that you're going to be putting down others,
Yeah.
right? They're mutually exclusive. Yes, I agree. Okay, let's then clarify any quick questions you have about these points. Let's rattle them down. Daphne, tell me about what did you conclude for the first one?
Oh. You said liberal because he's increasing rights for men. So he's trying to expand individual rights.
Okay, are there any other reasons? So beyond the voting, are there any other reasons people would argue this one is liberal?
Just more rights in general.
Because of the people more say in government.
Uh-huh.
By expanding rights and suffrage, he's kind of diminishing the social hierarchy.
Theoretically. The other point to note is that holding that vote for by universal manhood suffrage to gain the presidency initiates or validates the Second Republic, right? He's creating the Second Republic. So we think about forms of government and which ones fall into which ideologies. A republic is one that's traditionally been championed by liberals or even radicals.
What is the Second Republic I keep seeing?
What is this Second Republic everyone's talking about?
Is that this?
It's all the rage. It's the period in time in France from 1848, when Louis Napoleon wins this election, declaring the Second Republic, sharing power as president with a legislature, until, when does it stop?
1870.
No?
18. Wait, no.
19.
It was like 1860 something.
1852. It lasts a glorious 4 years.
Oh, well, yeah, and then he's like, let me be the supreme emperor, so he's in power until 1870.
That's right. It's the same guy, but he goes from...
Which is the type of government, because he's like, you guys can have rights. Never mind, I want everything.
Right, exactly. So, at which point it creates the Second Empire. When's the First Republic?
That's
Which guys?
Napoleon, Louis,
No.
No,
the
the
First Republic.
Oh.
It's Robespierre and friends. It's the National Convention and the Jacobins.
There's a little group of committee of safety.
That's
Committee
right.
of Public Safety.
The Committee of Public Safety.
Public safety and safety.
And then in 1852, he transforms himself, as we'll see here, into an emperor, and that creates the Second Empire. What's the First Empire?
Napoleon.
Napoleon I. Okay, Annie.
So, wait. Did he crown himself like Napoleon the First? Napoleon the, like, did he?
Oh, no, I don't think it's...
No, he did it on the same day. You don't, I know you don't.
So there's some symbolism that overlaps. I don't think there's the same
Didn't he
coordination
do
stuff.
the same thing as Napoleon?
That crown thing? I don't know, that's a good question. I'm not sure. All right, let's move on. Are we ready?
Yeah.
Next one. Okay,
Is
Madeline, tell me...
He's dead by now.
Yes. Tell me about the bill to increase the role of the Roman Catholic Church.
Oh, that's...
Yeah, he said it's conservative
Because?
because he's trying to put religion back as like a main source in society.
Okay. Good. And particularly, why would he be putting the Roman Catholic Church back and shaping primary and secondary education? Brenna?
To preserve the status quo.
Okay. And build support. Notice.
To the status quo.
That's really up the hill sort of thing. Okay. And because it's about right, building a coalition of lots of different groups who are all gonna support you. So I need to, I'm gonna win over all the, all men who can vote by holding a plebiscite. I'm gonna win over traditionalists, Catholics, by making that more prominent in education. And so I'm building a wider coalition.
Oh, so that was a way of getting more supporters.
Right,
Okay.
okay.
He's like,
wait, how is that gonna
Napoleon, he was good at
Because
making
if he
allies with
adds,
the right people at the right time.
Yes, yeah, true.
Wait,
Oh,
society,
so
then
there's
he
one
will
uncle and
get
great
I
uncle.
think it's his uncle. I think it's his normal uncle.
Oh.
Leah, tell me about the third
Everybody
one.
that isn't Catholic.
We said conservative.
But sometimes I really
Okay,
Thank you.
we said conservative because he's restricting the rights of the lower class. And also that goes against liberalism because liberalism has expanding individual rights.
Good,
And
okay,
also preserving the hierarchy, right?
exactly. All right, so a lot of reasons. Okay, Corinna, tell me about the next one.
We said that it was conservative because it was taking away the people's voice in the government and returning to authoritarian government.
Good, all right. Elizabeth, tell me about the plebiscites.
Okay, so we said that it was kind of both in a way. So it was it was, okay, conservatism because the yes or no was kind of like known, so it's kind of rigged for him to win. Then it was liberalism because it gave people the right to vote either way.
Okay, right, but of course, as we talked about, plebiscites definitely skew toward the yes vote. Okay, 92%, 97% margins. But this, of course, gives Napoleon authority to do whatever he wants. If he says 97% of the population stand behind me as the emperor, that is a vote in favor of my sort of free reign over the country, which we're going to talk about in just a second. Okay?
What does that mean by 92% and 97% margins?
Oh, that 92% of the people, I think he holds two separate votes to make himself emperor. The first 92% people say yes, the second 97% say yes.
Okay.
All right?
This
Okay. Adam, what did you say about infrastructure improvements?
I said that was liberal,
Because?
because it changes and improves the city.
Okay, why is that? How does that connect to some of the stuff?
Because it's kind of like an Enlightenment ideal and romantic ideal, just improvement.
Oh, okay, so the notion of progress
Yeah.
and modernization, and perhaps we'd link it back to this economic stuff, right? Making the French economy at a time where it's behind the British economy catch up, so it can be maximally productive. All right, Michael, next one about regulating pawn shops and so on.
No, I said that was liberal, but I said it's liberal because for like the worker housing, it like supports equality and like gives people more rights and like better quality of life and stuff.
Okay, good. Again, building that coalition, right? Allowing labor, who might be his biggest threat, to do the things that they want to do, like give them good houses and safe credit, is going to make them supportive of him. Grace, what did you say about the workers' right to strike and unionize?
Which Grace?
Oh, Grace Lewis.
Okay.
My subtle
oh,
pen
no.
didn't accomplish.
I would say it would be liberal because it's giving workers like rights and expanding their rights.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Julia, you want to do the next one?
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, this is granted workers' right to unionize and strike.
No,
I'm just kidding.
that was a good joke.
However, National Assembly will have opposition candidates and its representatives, blah, blah, blah. Okay,
I took
so,
a lot of time to write that myself.
sorry,
Blah, blah, blah.
I just don't know what you meant.
Look at the
Bottom of the page.
Look at you one, it's Chicago format, come on.
Okay, anyways, regardless, this is very liberal because, two things. The National Assembly is, allows for more voice from the people
Okay.
and,
Representative government, legislature, yep.
and by allowing opposition, it gives the freedom of like strikes and protests.
Okay,
And, it's, the representatives are elected, which is also very democratic and liberal and
okay, good. Michael?
so forth.
Can you say that it was conservative because he's like restoring the old status quo?
Awesome.
How is he restoring the old status? Oh. I mean, in an absolute sense, I suppose, because this is something that had existed previously, but I think let's anchor it to these values rather than Because then otherwise they'll all be like moving targets, right? It'll be hard to identify.
But yeah, because wasn't the National Assembly more liberal when it was before?
Which one? Like all the way in the French Revolution, like 1789 National Assembly? That came from the tennis court oath?
It's so interesting.
Like the one that like Michael was like, yeah, just because going back to the old way, it wasn't that also liberal.
Right, right. Yeah, so that's why we're going to just keep it as liberal, even though it's something that had existed previously.
Because it was liberal.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Rachel, tell me about Wars of Expansion.
Wars of Expansion, conservative, because he's ruining the peace.
Okay.
And
Gonna put that out there.
militaristic and expansionist.
Right.
Yeah.
And
And
driving rivalries between
rivalry.
right, if they can win, which they do for some, and then not for the last one, which will be a big deal in a little bit. Okay, and Kate, the final one. Yes.
Or the Prussian. That was both. It was liberal because he's making a new type of government with the parliament, but it was also conservative because a hereditary emperor was an older type of government, like with Napoleon I.
Yeah, good. So I think, I can't remember who characterized this. Cindy, that you characterized this big theme for him. I think one way to think about the relationship between conservatism and liberalism for Napoleon III is that there are elements of both, but that the liberalism tends to be something that might be more on the surface as a way to build support to get groups who might be opposed to him traditionally on his team, which he will then undercut when he has the opportunity to do
There's a
so.
lot of sneaky politicians who do that
Smart
today.
one.
I'm not gonna, well, I'm glad you recognize that. I'm not gonna venture into those waters. Okay, I would get out a piece of notebook paper, because what I want to talk about now, if the screen will get big, for the last 20 minutes, fits right in line with this big theme that Cindy has suggested for us.
Lecturing.
I'm gonna do it. I don't know about you. La lectura de los ciudades en el medio del 1900, el siglo 1900. Okay, so I'm particularly all right, relationship between what we just did and this brief lecture is that hopefully you've seen the line or the point you made about infrastructural improvements. One of the most lasting legacies of Napoleon III is the rebuilding of Paris that he commissions that takes place between 1853 and 1859. So it's not just like there are new railroads and some new investment in banks, but Paris is fundamentally transformed. And the Paris that you know and that is this grand tourist monument gets formed in the reign of Napoleon III, led by this guy, Georges-Haussmann. So his name is a worthwhile one to know because historians and urban planning people and people interested in the history of cities will talk about the transformation of cities in the way that he created here, which I'll describe for you in a second, as the process of Haussmannization. Okay, he's gained his own nominalization, right? To Haussmannize, I guess it's a verb, and it's turned into a noun by adding the Asian. So it's this fundamental transforming of the city, and I'm going to describe for you what it is now. But that all goes to say he's the visionary brains behind transforming Paris. But Napoleon III authorizes him to do this, and Napoleon III is only able to do that after he gets elected as emperor. So that whole plebiscite for Louis Napoleon Bonaparte to become Napoleon III is the precondition for Haussmann's transformation of Paris, because the sweeping changes. Yes, yes. We're going to talk about those more specifically. What's that?
He's not even a real Napoleon, he's a Louis Napoleon.
Well, his first name is
Louis Napoleon Bonaparte.
Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. Yep. Okay. So let's talk first about his big goals. I'm going to come back to that slide in a second. This is a plan, a map of Paris with the dark lines indicating the new major boulevards.
Isn't that in our
that he,
textbook?
I don't know if this exact one is because I couldn't find one with an English subtitle, but I love the fact that I have a Spanish caption here. So this is the scheme of the different. Anyway, all this what's called Hachured area, this hatched off area, you see that shaded stuff, is all land that Haussmann added to Paris in the course of his administration. So he has three big goals in this transformation, so you get a sense, before we even look at photos of it, that it's dramatic. About 60% of Paris's buildings get rebuilt or renovated.
Is that a goal?
No, that's just like showing you how dramatic this is. 60% of the city.
The outside is like the fields?
It's like, some of it is fields, this will be like, I think the Tuileries garden, but the rest of it is new quarters, new neighborhoods.
So 60% of buildings get
Either, yeah, are new or renovated, transformed in some way. So there's three big goals, three big reasons that Haussmann embarks on this huge transformation. The first has to do with public health, which, having read the ghost map to jog your memory, you will be unsurprised to learn that urban, dense cities were squalid places. Corinna?
When did the ghost map take place again?
1854, right? That cholera outbreak is 1854. This rebuilding is starting in 1853.
Like
A year before.
And a couple of months.
A year.
Yeah, that was in England.
But that
That's in England, but nevertheless.
Well, I mean, it's still massive.
All right. Paris had not had its had not. Let me avoid the double negative. Paris also suffered from cholera outbreaks. Okay, 1831, there was a massive outbreak. 18,400 people died in Paris. So the issue of drinking, excrement, tainted water, and dying as a result was not something the French people didn't do. In other words, this happened to French people too. So public health is an issue. We got to make sure that we don't have these public health issues. Let's find ways to build new sewer systems to safely dispose of waste away from our drinking water supply. Right? So that's one big goal. Second big goal, are you ready? Second big goal. Let's create a new set of transportation infrastructure, railways, big roads, streetcars, and so on, that will facilitate more industrialization. As we know, the French have to catch up with the English. We know that the continent is behind the British Isles, and this is an opportunity for a huge investment in infrastructure that will facilitate more trade throughout the country and allow the goods made in Paris to get out to the ports and out to the rest of the country and grow the nation's economy. All right, that's the second point. And the third point has to do with the revolutions of 1848 and the revolutions of 1830 and of 1789, which is to say, those all happened and started in the dense inner core of the city, where the streets were really narrow and there was a fair concentration of sans-culottes, right, the most radical elements. So he wants to find a way to rebuild the city to both take the poor, who have been the key revolutionary element, and disperse them out of the city. So it's harder for them to unite, exactly. So they can't have collective action. And two, to make sure that if there is an uprising, that it's A, extremely difficult to stage, and B, easy for the military to shut down. And the way he views that is to build huge boulevards.
So the third goal is kind of like organize, install boulevards in order to.
So yeah, so do you see the connection? How is installing boulevards going to have anything to do with stopping revolutions?
Well, because
they use your arms.
Hold on, everybody's saying stuff at the same time. Leah.
The military can interfere and it's harder for them to start uprisings.
Okay, the military can move in very quickly,
Yeah.
stopping uprising. That's one reason. Why else?
It's harder to stage an uprising in general because it's so open and if you want to have secret gathering, I guess, in the streets, it's like, hey, look at everybody, look, they're having a secret gathering. There's all this
It's less about secret gathering and it's more about the ways in which the revolutionaries closed off parts of the city to the military, which was through creating barricades.
Yeah.
If you blow up the small, tiny little streets in the intersection and create massive barricades, you better have a lot of scrap wood to build a barricade that covers the span, right, of the Champs-Élysées.
Yeah.
How
Right.
big,
What were the other uprisings, 1789 and what?
1830.
how wide were these bullets?
Enormous, I don't know.
Like the size of the room, like that?
Oh, much wider.
It says building.
The new boulevards?
Yes.
Yes, and
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Like width, like State Street?
Salt Lake is a good city of how that's been, I mean, it was built,
We have the
actually
widest
before
streets
Haussmann,
in the
but
country.
very wide street. It was hard to build a boulevard across State Street. Probably, possibly wider in some cases, but probably comparable, okay?
So it was very, like, it wasn't just, you don't need a lot, it's like, it's gonna be.
It's like practically
So it's
impossible.
like that versus this.
Or, I mean, we don't even have good parallels in
Like
Salt
the
Lake.
avenues?
But if you've traveled like in Boston or in Philadelphia,
Little
you've gone to the
alleyways.
old
Oh my
corners
God,
of those
alleyways
tiny
that
little.
barely have enough space.
Yes,
for them.
that's what I'm talking
You have
about.
like the streets that are like from this side of the table to that side.
Yes, exactly. Those are the old streets that could be easily barricaded. You can imagine State Street hard to barricade, right?
Very
So, building boulevards is both beautiful and scenic and is going to allow creation of big new monuments like the Arc de Triomphe, but it's also going to be hard to barricade.
Could you
So
say
the
that
whole
because
process
it like
is-
increases the nationalism and
Did it
the
work?
and stuff?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
So can you say that it was like liberal because of like, it was like the same sort of like outward display of like,
Yeah.
because of like creating the beauty and stuff, but it really is to like protect.
Sure, yeah, exactly. That's why I think this is a really nice framing to think about this transformation. Okay, underlying much of this third point in the redesign of the city is a notion advanced by Enlightenment thinker, turn of the 19th century Enlightenment thinker, Jeremy Bentham, which is known as disciplinary architecture.
Do I need to know the name Jeremy Bentham?
Jeremy Bentham is the founder of utilitarianism. He's a pretty big deal. Then we seek, greatest good for greatest
And
number,
this is-
very rational approach.
Still Paris.
This is still Paris, but I'm saying Haussmann's concept of his rebuilding is framed by the ideas of disciplinary architecture.
He's the founder of utilitarianism.
Jeremy Bentham?
Can you spell utilitarianism?
Sure.
Utilitarianism.
So are we gonna, so what is discipline?
Okay, so stick with me, because I'm about to tell you.
Is it,
Oh, I thought you were just gonna leave it up there.
No,
and
no.
like,
is it
Okay,
a, yeah, go.
okay, this, by the way, was in the first, it was in the research journal packet, at least this image.
Oh,
Bentham's notion of disciplinary architecture comes from his musings about creating what he called a panopticon prison.
Oh,
Okay.
Whoa.
That
Well,
is
that looks
weird.
pretty cool.
Okay,
Yeah,
pan,
really.
all, optic, seeing. So, a prison where all prisoners can be seen at all times. And the notion was, you put a guard tower here in the middle, and it's open and has windows all around, that is in the center of the courtyard, that can look into the windows of each individual cell, and theoretically monitor all the prisoners at all times.
That is so smart.
So is it
So that's
And the idea,
disciplinary
okay,
architecture?
I guess I may answer your question. The concept is that within this architectural setup, you're creating a space where the prisoners don't know if they're being watched at any moment or not. So they begin to internalize the behavior and appropriate actions that they're in prison to basically learn, right? So that they can
Because
be
they don't know if
rehabilitated.
they're being watched.
Because they don't know if they're being watched. So rather than go and tell them be a good person, you're gonna put them in the space where if they are bad, they'll be punished if they get caught, right? So
So
ideally,
they can't see out?
so the prisoners cannot see into the watchtower, but the watchtower can see out into the prisons.
it's like those windows, it's like, yeah, it's like, yeah.
Wait, there's
So-
a tower within each pentagon?
Yes. So there's all these different
Oh.
panopticon towers.
Why are they not doing
Think
that
of it
now?
as
I thought you were
strategic
in the
building?
middle of all of
No, each of
each
these,
thing, and then they each had their own.
each
What's
one of
the
these
thing in the
is
middle?
the all-seeing eye.
Oh.
What's the
Okay.
one in the middle?
Another big panopticon, and maybe the lunchroom. I don't know. Okay. But this concept, this is really influential, that you can get groups to behave in a way you want them to by designing spaces in a manner that will get those groups who might be rebellious or whatever to internalize the behavior, the disciplined behavior that they should have because they don't know whether or not they're being watched at any moment.
That is
Basically,
too smart.
So
You
strategic,
can manipulate people based
on
on
surrounding
surroundings.
Based on architecture, the built environment can shape human behavior. That's exactly the notion.
So, built environment shapes you.
strategic architecture.
This, by the way, I think is still true, but
Why don't they structure prisons like this?
they did build some in the States and in England, but I think they're less effective than the notion. The concept is really a sort of compelling one, and really
Yeah.
thought-provoking one. I'm not sure about how it worked in terms of actually rehabilitating prisoners.
It's like, it's, they have blocks on the doors and stuff.
How do they get out of the tower without interacting with the prison?
Oh, well, it's all shaded, then you can go down to the bottom, and then there's like a covered walkway out. So, okay. Old Paris, let's talk about Paris itself in this rebuilding. Old Paris is broken into 12 administrative districts, all known as arrondissements. And I know, because someone in fourth period, or a couple people in fourth period mentioned that, I guess you talked about this in French class, those of you in French class?
What French
No.
class are they in?
I don't know, I thought maybe 3. I don't know. Okay, so these numbers, all these Roman numerals, are the old districts of Paris, these old neighborhoods of Paris.
Is this not having to do with Germany anymore?
Okay, we're done with, and Bentham, always last names, you guys aren't BFF yet. Okay, there's time. But Old Paris, what I want to emphasize is how disciplinary architecture will reshape things, Julia, okay?
So it's the arrondissements are the old.
Each of these neighborhoods, each of these old neighborhoods, basically. And within each of these neighborhoods, which are, right, all sort of centered around the Seine, you have housing where there's mixed groups all living in the same space. So maybe you've seen this, right? There's this diagram, or this drawing from the 19th century, 1852 book that shows the cross-section of what a typical townhouse would be. It emphasizes the class fusion in one space, right? You have the fancy bourgeois family living on the first and second floor. You have the servant class working and living in the basement. You have maybe students or, you know, I don't know, small businessmen living up above on the third floor. And then up in the attic, you've rented out these spaces to an artist, I don't know, a poor, struggling family, and like a woman who's wearing an umbrella inside. Okay,
The fourth story stairs.
It's a cat.
It's a cat.
Oh, that was like a baby.
No, not a baby. No, put on that baby gate. Okay,
It seemed like if you're
So
rich,
my point to you about this image, in the old Paris, is that all classes lived under one roof, mixed together in the same arrondissement. So Haussmann thought, well, if we want to solve the problem of uprisings happening in the core of the city, we have to take the poor people, who are likely to be those leading revolutions, these artists are particularly frightening, and get them to be dispersed so they can't have collective action all together. So how do you do that? Well, Haussmann thought, how about I expand the city by 240,000 people? So that's what he did, right? You can see the old 12 districts, they now reorganize it, and he's expanded it to 20, so he adds 8 new districts. So annexing all this territory adds a total of 240,000 new people to Paris and puts them under the administration of the Parisian police. So the Parisian police can now monitor and control their behavior. But he also starts to rebuild both the internal, the old arrondissement, the central ones, and of course build stuff in the new outer ones. And as he builds and renovates apartments and housing, he changes the rents on them, increasing the rents dramatically on the internal ones, and making new affordable workers' houses around the exterior.
Oh, so is that to put the poor people on the outside so that if they start a revolution, they can get to them?
You can't get them to start a revolution because they're too spread out. They can't band together and have collective action. So you can see the stats of this working. In 1861, in the first arrondissement, there's 89,000 people. 11 years later, it's dropped by 15,000 because these rents have gone up. Right? Similarly, in the 6th, across the Seine, 95 down to 90. And then the external ones grow dramatically. 17th arrondissement, 75 to 101. The 20th, here, from 70 to 92. So he shifts populations around.
Because he's putting all of the poor people on the outside.
But the thing is, this, in terms of actual square mileage or whatever, it's so much.
Okay.
And the housing, which I'm sorry we don't have time to deal with necessarily, is also single-family homes.
Okay.
That the apartments they create are designed for people to live in family units, not like a bunch of 20-something textile workers all together who are going to get each other riled up about how horrible their working conditions
So
are.
were the inner city poor who already owned in the original 12 districts stripped of their property?
I mean, the inner city poor don't own anything, right?
Well,
they're the renting class.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, well those buildings get redesigned and rebuilt, and it's like, no, single families should live here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, they're basically forced out. Okay, so yes, this works. All right, long story short, It reorganizes the population, it stops the potential uprisings until, we'll see, after the failure of the Franco-Prussian War, which we'll get to, the poor in Paris rise up and have a revolt, but the way they make it successful is they close the city gates to the outside military. They take over the entire city and declare themselves the Paris Commune because they can't stage an uprising within, so they just have to take over the whole thing. So, we'll leave that for another day. Anyway, so modern Paris looks the way it does because of Haussmann. Grand boulevards, you can see the bad, crappy old city. There it is getting rebuilt. Ah, new, beautiful, clean streets. But now, look how wide those boulevards are. No poor people are going to barricade that. Okay, have a great weekend. I see you on Tuesday. Yeah? Tuesday. Read about the Crimean War, and then read about after the Crimean War.
And it's in the same packet.
It's in the same packet, the Crimean War stuff, and then after the Crimean War, it's back in McKay. Okay.
So doing McKay over the weekend?
Yes.
Unless you want to do it on Monday night.
Thank you.
Tea.
Wait, is 764 the time of McKay?
It's up to you. Sure. Huh?
Is that McKay? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, that
Yeah, I'll put that up.
So the packet and then book.
Yeah.
And we should read the packet first.
I like the history.
You're welcome. See ya. Thank you.
That's smart. I would do that. I would dig that new system if I was one of the. But how would the poor people get to work? Just travel long distances then?
Well, actually a lot of the factory districts get moved out to the periphery, right? Because the land is cheaper to develop. You're not building factories right in the interior. So you also start spreading out the factories. Coal power allows you to put a factory wherever you want to, right?
Yeah.
So this way, there was factory district, there's not one condensed factory district where all workers get together. You've got lots of different factories spread around. The workers are never able to necessarily all coalesce in one space.
Okay. What about like police then?
What about them?
How would they be able to intervene in